Environment webinar, Net Zero in Action, Chartered Environmentalists Leading the Way. This webinar is being held as part of Net Zero Week 2026, sponsored by Balfour Beatty, with a range of events bringing together all the stakeholders needed to reach net zero by 2050. To introduce myself, I'm Sarah Ridgen. I'm the Policy and Communities of Practice Officer at SocEnv, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Please feel free to put any questions you have into the Q&A throughout the webinar, and we will come to the questions following the presentations. You should also be able to upvote questions, which will help with selecting the most popular questions when we get to the Q&A. You can use the chat to introduce yourselves, and we will be sharing some links there to further information as well. So before we get to today's presentations, a quick introduction to SocEnv. For those who might not know, we are a not-for-profit umbrella body with a rural charter, and we champion and register professionals with proven competence in their environmental work. By nature, we are interdisciplinary and collaborative. You can see the logos of the professional bodies with a license to award our chartered level registration, Chartered Environmentalists, or CEMP in short, on the screen now. You'll note that these bodies cover a wide range of sectors, including but not limited to agriculture, engineering, resource management, forestry, built environment, and water. So moving on to the main section of the webinar, I'm delighted to be joined by our three fantastic guest speakers today, who are all chartered environmentalists applying their proven skills, expertise, and leadership skills to deliver net zero in practice. Today's first speaker is Anya Ledwith-SocEnv, founder and director of ESHCON, who's going to talk about reducing travel emissions in a micro business. So over to you, Anya.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everybody. Isn't it wonderful that technology keeps us on our toes every day? It's probably something to do with the 40-degree heat or 30-degree heat that we're all experiencing for the last few weeks. So very pleased to be here today. My name is Anya Ledwith, and I'd like to just share a little bit about my business, my experience as being a chartered environmentalist, and particularly as a micro business, as a single person organisation. So what I've done within my business, just focusing on travel emissions that might be useful for other organisations to think about. Let's see if my screen is working. No, come on.
I think it may be because you're not in the full slide deck.
There we go. Hopefully that works.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, that's working.
Excellent. So as I said, my name is Anya Ledwith. I run an environmental and carbon management consultancy called ESHCON. I am a fellow of ICEP, the Institute for Sustainability and Environmental Professionals, previously known as IEMA, and I'm a chartered environmentalist. And I was looking back through my records to see how long I've been doing this. Well, I've been in this field for quite some time, but I've been a chartered environmentalist since 2005. My business, just very quickly, as I say, a single person business. I tend to work with large organisations, large companies to help put in ISO 14001 management systems. I do an awful lot of carbon reporting. I am a registered ESOS assessor and carbon verification. And interestingly, hopefully, I'm the first registered carbon accountant possibly in the world, because ICEP have now brought out a register of trusted, trained and experienced carbon accountants, and I managed to get my application in first on that. Just very quickly, what's it mean to be a chartered environmentalist? Well, I suppose it's three elements that I'm proud to be a chartered CENV, but what I find is useful is firstly, when I'm speaking with my clients and other organisations, it demonstrates my credibility. and it shows my expert status. Having those letters after my name is, it's not something to sniff at. It's a really good way of demonstrating that. And because through continuous professional development, we have to provide our updates to our member bodies. People know that we didn't just do a course 20 years ago, or I didn't just sign up 20 years ago. I am keeping on top of my game with the experience and training. It also promotes the environment industry as well. I mean, when I started this, the environment industry was a completely different ball game. It really was a case of like knocking loudly on people's doors to be let in, to be like, do we even need an environmental consultant? So having the CEnv status and having SocEnv supporting us is a really good way of supporting and promoting the environmental industry and the wider sustainability industry. And lastly, it shows leadership. It shows leadership to my clients, very particularly because they're wanting to be assured that they're working with a credible and innovative person, that they can trust me. But it also shows to my partners and indeed other environmental professionals, other sustainability professionals, that this is worth doing. Chartered Environmentalists is the pinnacle that we can achieve. And this is something that really, I think, a lot of sustainability professionals should be aiming towards, and it's like use it to raise your profile and raise the industry's profile as well. So today I just wanted to talk a little bit about the carbon emissions and net zero within my organisations. So as I say, I am a single person business. I work from home. What you can see behind me is effectively the scope of operations for my organisations. There's, when you're like thinking about your carbon footprinting, there's not a lot of data to go into it. And what I'm showing here is like my footprint, my operational emissions. I would say here, the figures here that I'm presenting here excludes purchasing. But for my operational emissions, it's a whole whopping great 1 tonne of CO2. And that's using location-based emissions, because I am actually on a green electricity tariff. So that will reduce to my market-based emissions as well. But looking at that graph there, you can see sort of like my baseline that I started in 2019, looking at sort of like what's the important things within the operational emissions, and it's basically electricity and gas at home and business travel. Business travel is a significant thing for a consultant. I'm not producing materials, I'm not producing a product. It is services that I'm delivering, and effectively it's the electricity I use to run my computers and travel when I go to my clients. So business travel was so significant at 77%. But what you can see here is from the graph here, that actually my emissions have managed to be reduced by 70% from the baseline. And what I want to do here is just share a little bit of how I've done that. On to the next slide. With business travel so significant, we needed to look at how I was traveling, how my business gets out there, whether it's using cars, using public transport, flights, etc., and just see how we can do that to easily reduce emissions. And actually, the purchase of an electric vehicle, an electric company car, has actually been really important. So it's reduced my business travel part of the emissions from 77% down to 31%. I did that just over a year ago, about a year and a half, and it was quite interesting just to think about the considerations that I, as an individual, but also as a business owner, as a one-person business, had to go through. So I had to think about the financial implications, both to the company, in terms of profit and reducing corporation tax, but also to myself as an individual. So thinking about benefits in kind that I had to then be responsible for. Being a micro business, single person, brilliant. It's easier and quicker to make those business decisions. I can recognise in larger organisations, there are far more hurdles to go through. Procurement processes, everything needs to be signed off, what can be done within the organisation. But because I'm a micro business, and let's face it, there are an awful lot of single person consultancies out there, that does give us more flexibility. The next thing that we had to think about is the brand and model of the car. I had to think about what's useful for me and the types of trips I'm making, what sort of range I needed, what sort of I don't know, like impression I give when I drive up to my clients. So that was a little bit of a headache. I must say, I did speak to various people to get some advice on that. And lastly, just one thing to think about was a home charger. I'm lucky, I've got a house, I've got a driveway, I was able to install a home charger. So I get really good electricity tariff for nighttime use. So after 11:30 at night until 5:30 in the morning, I think I pay 7 pence per kilowatt hour, whereas it's 20, I don't know, 26, 27 during the day. So that gives me the flexibility that I'm able to charge at home cheaply and make it more cost effective. Obviously, when I'm out and about, there's a whole load of infrastructure in terms of charging networks. Not so cheap, obviously. There's VAT to pay on top of that as well. But just for the consideration that I had to go through, I was wanting to think, what's right for my business, what's right for me as an individual, what brand and model and type of vehicle I'm wanting, and how am I going to charge it? It's been great. I love my car. It's brilliant. I'm not going to sort of like talk about particular brands, but it has been useful. Just thinking about all of those things that we can consider, particularly on the flexibility. And I just quickly share some other things. So not everybody's in the position to buy the company car, but there are other things that I've thought about within the business to reduce the impact of transport. So obviously it's like having a travel policy, thinking about the need to travel. Do I need to do it? What alternatives are there? Public transport, obviously, for longer trips. I've just come back from Yorkshire. I was in Yorkshire overnight, so that was really nice trip on the train. If I'd driven that, it would have been a right headache. But I've also included the public transport and no flights in my terms and conditions, so my clients know that I will be expecting to go by public transport or use the car if I need to. Very quickly, just thinking about service delivery, how to change work practices. Most of my work is desk-based now. I'm doing less site visits, although that is picking up again now that ESOS has started. But we developed remote auditing techniques, thinking about how to do sales meetings. Can we do that remotely rather than physically go to client sites? Zoom and Teams is your friend. We all use it so much now. It's just wonderful we have that tool. A few things I'll put in here that aren't so relevant for me as my business, but might be for your businesses. Salary sacrifice. Just think about that. Can you provide salary sacrifice for your staff in terms of, certainly like for electric vehicles, buying bicycles, buying season tickets? Also, don't forget, can you put in things like insulation into your staff home or solar, perhaps? There might be that ability to have salary sacrifice scheme for them. Big things in terms of like the other big things from a carbon emission point of view, pension and banking. They are the biggies for many organisations and particularly for single people business. So have a think about the choice of providers that are out there. Certainly from a pensions point of view, what sort of investment funds they're using, are they fossil fuels? Is your bank also divesting from fossil fuels? So that can be a big element for your own carbon emissions. I would recommend expanding the scope of your footprinting. I gave the operational emissions earlier. When you include purchasing on that, and again, pension is a massive part of my scope 3 emissions. It rises from 0.9 to 11.6 tonnes of CO2 per year. So that shows just how significant purchasing and investments and pensions are. And I just want to finish off with one thing. The best thing you can do is share your experiences, engage with your clients, your contacts, your friends, your family. Tell the world about what you can do to reduce your carbon emissions. Tell the world what it's like to be a chartered environmentalist. I've said it's great to be a chartered environmentalist. It is. Not a lot of people know about it, but the more that we talk about it, the more that we talk about our own experiences, that's a brilliant way of getting more people to buy into the concept, realise it is worth doing, it is easy to do, and if we all work together, big tick all round. So thank you for your time today. I think there'll be a Q&A at the end, but I'll hand back to Sarah or am I handing on to Chantal, perhaps, to take on the next session. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Anya. That was really great, and I think a brilliant start to today's webinar. As Anya mentioned, if you have any questions, please put these into the Q&A function on your toolbar, and we'll come to the questions once all our speakers have finished their presentations. So I'm now pleased to welcome our next speaker, Chantal Branwood, CM, who is the founder and director at EcoAction, with a talk focused on her work reducing carbon emissions in the pet and vet sector. So I'm just going to reshare my screen. Bear with me a second. Hopefully this comes through okay. Can you just confirm you can see that, Chantal?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Brilliant. So I'll hand over to you.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here speaking to you today. Thanks, Anya. That was fab talk. Great one to follow. So as Sarah said, I'm Chantal. I'm the founder of EcoAction, and similar to Anya, we're a solo consultancy based up near Greater Manchester. Now, most of my work is in the corner of the economy that people don't necessarily link with sustainability, and that is the pet and veterinary sector. I came to this from a more commercial background rather than an environmental science degree. So my chartered registration has done a lot of heavy lifting for me over the years, and it's been a really massive boost. My chartership is relatively recent, earlier this year, but I was a registered environmental professional through SocEnv and ICEP for the last few years. So it's been a real enhancement for me in terms of career, credibility, network, and mentorship as well. So there are many ways to enter this profession, but getting the professional registration really underpins it. And today I want to show you 3 different pieces of work that we've done in the pet and vet sector. It's a sector that is relatively young in terms of sustainability and is still finding its way. So it's been really, really interesting to be working on this space. Sarah, if you could move on, that would be fab. Thank you. So why pet and vet? Well, first of all, it is my background. I was in the pet and vet sector for a long time before moving over into sustainability. And the reason that is so important is, we are a nation of pet lovers. There's 21 million cats and dogs in the UK at the last PDSA report. That's a huge amount of pets. And that doesn't account for horses, rabbits, guinea pigs, the whole spectrum of pets that we have here. So it's a huge industry, and not many people think of it as an emission source. But 2025, there was a study done that showed that 1% of the UK's greenhouse gas emissions could be attributed to the ingredients, just the ingredients in dog food. Okay, so that's just dogs, that's not taking into account cats or veterinary care, wider supply chains. It is a big material slice of emissions that has very little scrutiny outside of the industry. And it's young in terms of sustainability. It's not young in terms of an industry. There's always been veterinary medicine, but it's moving very fast. And there is some really fantastic work happening, and everybody is pushing towards net zero. About 6 or 7 years ago, there was a fantastic community interest company formed called Vet Sustain, and they really got the ball rolling with this. And now the British Veterinary Association, the Royal College, have all got sustainability and net zero commitments as well. outside of regulators and big organizations, there are a lot of practices that are really getting hold of this. They're calculating their carbon footprints, looking at how they can responsibly keep using anesthetic gases and the wider supply chain of all these single-use plastics and things that we need in healthcare settings, just as with humans as well, to keep everything safe and sterile. So some really good momentum gathering. But if you think about engineering, built environment, automotive, it's relatively young in terms of standards and frameworks that we can actually apply. So when there's no agreed method, you have to build it, and usually by adapting something from a more established field. So that sometimes means that we have to lean heavily on the judgment of the people that are doing the work, which in my case would be as a chartered environmentalist. And that is one of the competencies that we lean into, and that's applying our knowledge and sound judgment to further sustainability. And chartership, as Anya alluded to, it's not some, it's not a certificate or something that well, it is a certificate, but it's not a course you can take or just buy it. You have a 2,000-word assessment. You have to sit with two very experienced assessors for over an hour and be really probed around your competencies. And a lot of that is on how we think, how we make our decisions. And I think really importantly for me, especially in my sector, is how do we handle uncertainty and how do we apply our ethics in an area that there's not necessarily something that you can lean on that's done before. So chartership really helps in these areas where we've got to flex and adapt because there's nothing for us to sort of follow at the moment. So none of the initiatives that we're undertaking are just for the sake of it or because we love pets. They are there to help people transition to a lower carbon way of working, and whether that is a practice or a supply company or a pet owner, everybody needs to be involved in order to get the industry over to our net zero targets. Next slide, please, Sarah. So as I've already mentioned, there is some fantastic work happening, and we're seeing it at different levels too. So whether it's a large organization calculating its carbon footprint or product level insights, it's all happening. And one of the first examples I've got here for you is some life cycle assessment work that we've done. So life cycle assessment, I'm thinking a lot of people in the room are going to be quite familiar with this. So it's a cradle to grave look at the full footprint and impact of a product from its life, from raw materials to what happens when it gets disposed of. And it's not just about carbon, there's many different impact categories. We look at water use, ecotoxicity, land use change, so it gives a real full impact. And for a company I work with, Pet Impact, they produce poo bags and pet incontinence pads, and we've done life cycle assessments for both. So I'll leave you to imagine how interesting the research was for the use phase of both of these types of products. But what we wanted to do is find out where the real impact was and what they could say in their product leaflets and what was safe to say in terms of marketing and advertising, and how they could help lower the impact of it. And insights that we've found is that impact is really where you think it is. So with LCAs, a lot of impact sits in the manufacturing stage. That's quite common across the board. But in these types of products, and unfortunately the amount of waste and poop dogs produce, they're really high volume. So think about over the lifetime of a dog, it could be anything from 8 to 15 years. That is thousands and thousands of poo bags, basically, generally ending up in landfill. So the key impact driver here and for this company is, it's not so much about how we're producing this poo bag, it's how do we help our pet owners that are purchasing it dispose of it properly, use them properly, make sure they're, responsibly put away. How do we engage with councils and local and national waste networks to make sure we've got the network that pet owners can dispose of these things responsibly? So it gives clear guidance to the client and their end customer. And another project worked on is with a company called Chanel Pharma. Now they do a lot of veterinary medicines. And again, these are to cradle to grave ISO standard LCAs. And they're looking at using these LCAs to reduce the impact of the product at its source on their manufacturing site. But it's also, interestingly, to help their clients in their scope 3 calculations on their push to net zero. So it all feeds in at all different levels. Now, there is a new standard that's been produced at the back end of last year for pharmaceutical products in the human sector, and that's PAS 2090. There's no veterinary equivalent yet. But rather than wait for one, we're adapting the human standard to actually fit and looking at trying to set the bar at how these are now done in the veterinary space. And sometimes that is what leading as a chartered environmentalist looks like. We can't wait for the standards to be formed. We have to try and apply those existing standards and the evidence that we have in other sectors and try and apply them to the work that we're doing. And it's using that judgment and that competencies again and making sure that even though nobody is actually knowing about the work we're doing early on, how is that going to stand up and how are we keeping on the right side of the line as we progress? And the hard part of an LCA, there's a lot of LCA software things out there, there's great training available, but it's your judgment that comes into play as a chartered. And does the boundary reflect the model that we're trying to build, or does it just look nice? And is the data a true reflection of the reality of how that product or that thing is going to be used in day to day? Because that's what a client is really working with us for and what they're paying for with a chartered professional. And it's about us giving them a standard that is not just a person's say so, it's meeting the bar of a professional chartership requirement as well. Next slide, please, Sarah. And we have another example as well of science-based targets. So we're probably all familiar with these targets, and these are fundamental in, net zero week, how we're going to get there, and help organisations set their net zero targets, and most importantly, get them validated through the SBTi. Setting a target is easy. Anybody can say, yes, 2014 sounds great. That's going to look wonderful in our impact report. But the real work is building that pathway underneath it. So where's the carbon reduction plan? What are the interim milestones that we've got to meet? What are the real actions that are going to move this company from here to here? Because without that, a net zero target is just a nice number with a wishful thinking behind it, basically. So my job as a chartered environmentalist, I feel like I'm saying that over and over, is to make sure that it is based on a plan that they understand, but that they can also take action on as well. And that is another big part of being willing to tell a client what they can and can't say, or what is credible, or when a green claim may not hold up. We have the Green Claims Code, we've got the EU Green Claims Directive coming in very soon. And this is one of our competencies, that we have to be professional and ethical conduct at all times with our clients and with ourselves. We're signing up with a registered duty to the environment and to society. It's not just who we're working with or who is paying our invoices. So if I need to tell a client, actually, these claims are not quite stacking up, and that's not me being awkward, that is me upholding the standards that I'm bound to. And then I work together with my clients to make sure that what we can say is truthful and transparent and based on data. And that's what helps a client trust that if you're bringing that chartered expertise, you're going to be able to push back and say, I think we need to take a wider view here and reflect on what is defensible and what is actually true and what we can say. Next slide, please, Sarah. Thank you. And then the last one, which is a little bit more fun, is around carbon paw prints and carbon hoof prints. So we have built a carbon calculator in partnership with Agria Pet Insurance, and they are very committed to their net zero targets. I've worked with them for a long time. They have SBTi validated targets. This isn't just around what they can do for themselves. This is very much, okay, we have our own targets. We can't do this without bringing our clients and our pet owners on board. And this tool just really is there to help pet owners get a sense of their pet's environmental impact, or carbon paw print. And just to be very clear what this is and what it isn't, it is not a verified GHG assessment. I can imagine some of you now thinking, what on earth is this? These are high-level inputs, and it is very deliberately so, because if we were to ask a pet owner for really in-depth data, they're just going to come off the tab and click off the calculator, and it's going to be gone, which totally defeats the object. And this is built to engage and then to encourage some action. It's really cute. It gives the dogs lots of animation. It's quick, it's fun, but most importantly, when they get to the end, it gives them hints and tips on how they can reduce their pet's impact. because there is going to be no net zero in the veterinary industry without 21 million pet owners getting behind this as well. And for some of them, it's the first time they think, oh my gosh, yes, there are things that I can do, and there are nice, easy swaps that I can take into account with my pet ownership. Because pet ownership is great for health, well-being. We don't want to discourage that, but there are really nice ways that we can make it less impactful on the planet. And that is one of the other key competencies of chartership. It's all about the communication. So knowing exactly what a tool is and isn't, to being very honest about that, and making complex data very accessible. Because if you have got a fantastic report or a fantastic carbon inventory, but nobody understands it, that's going to change nothing. Okay. So for me, the competency with chartership of communication is just as important as the technical competencies, because it's the data, yes, that makes it true and defensible, but the communication to enable somebody to take action on what you're giving them and get them to net zero, that is what really matters. And for me, that's what's really impactful in this space. And last slide, please, Sarah. So we have got life cycle assessments, SVTIs, carbon calculators. There's a vet practice carbon calculator out there as well. So this sector, in the last 6 years, it's flying. There's loads of resource, loads of engagement at all different levels, and pet owners are kind of that final missing piece that are really coming together now as well. And if there's something that I want to leave you with, it's that this worked for me actually to be two things at once, okay, which I really, when I first started, was a really interesting piece for me. So you have to be really rigorous and absolute in your data and your methodology, but you also have to have the ability to translate that into information that a real person can take and actually act on it. And those two things sometimes pull in opposite directions. But for me, that's what chartership is about, having the confidence and the judgment and the knowledge of what you are advising and telling is based on a wider professional framework. So it can open doors, it gives credibility, it gives my clients a lot of trust, I think, as well. So if you are weighing up registration or chartership, I would absolutely recommend you go for it. The SocEnv has given me lots of opportunity, support and mentorship. And I think that this is a fantastic way for yourself and your clients or your company, however you're working, to take that next step of pushing towards net zero as well. So that's it from me. As Sarah said, if you've got any questions, really looking forward to the Q&A shortly.
Many thanks, Chantal. That was really inspiring, and I think another really excellent presentation today. We now move on to our final speaker, Luke Robinson, CM, Senior Environmental Manager at Costain. Luke will be speaking about delivering net zero in the construction sector. So over to you, Luke.
Well, thank you very much. So I've had the. Can you see my screen? Sorry. Yeah, it looks like you can.
Yeah.
I've had the benefit of listening to Anya and Chantal, and I'm probably just going to build on that, but from the perspective of a different industry where we do different stuff. Towards the end, what Anya was talking about, really about the communication and being able to, that's what's expected of a chartered environmentalist, to have professional competence, to make good judgments, and that when the companies are employing a chartered environmentalist, that's what they're expecting from that person. I work in construction, and not everybody in the team I work with's primary motivation or primary, where the thing they're concentrating on at work is necessarily net zero or sustainability. More often it's cost and program. So I need to be able to communicate that in a way that they can act on the things that I want them to. And so translating complex environmental jargon into something they can use is a big part of my presentation as well. So I've been an environmental professional for just over 10 years now. And back when I started in the beginning, you don't know very much, but relatively quickly in my career, there was carbon. And carbon seemed the proxy measure for all sustainability in the construction industry. If it was low carbon, it must be sustainable. It was measurable. People could understand, well, to an extent understood, and that was important. And it is important it's definitely, it deserves the spotlight. But the messages start to become broader from environment and more complex. Biodiversity is now important, measurable, legally required on a lot of projects, if not contractually required, and also deserves a spotlight. Sometimes concentrating on just carbon can lead to unintended consequences. So I was lucky, I got to do some work with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, looking at hydrotreated vegetable oil, which is an alternative fuel to sort of hydrocarbon fuels. And it's lower carbon, but there are some problems with aspects of the supply chain. So if we don't do our due diligence, we can end up having land use impacts on the other side of the planet that we just don't see. And so then we've got to consider carbon versus other elements of sustainability, such as these, and such as these. And there's loads of sustainability words on there, but there isn't cost and program. I've forgotten to put those on, and actually, for a lot of people on projects, that is, what's important to them. That is more of their primary role. So I've got to try and make all of that complex system as a chartered environmentalist. I'm going to be able to translate that to people so that they can actually, take action to improve on all these things. So taking things back to just carbon, which is complex on its own. When I started my career, everyone was coming up with carbon tools, but carbon tools and carbon data tended to start with data sets that looked like this, lead to carbon calculations that looked like this, and this, with formulas in it that look like this. And I can't translate that to a project team to make decisions, so I have to get rid of it and try and make it into something that they can understand. And dashboards are quite popular nowadays. But in this particular case, we're looking at a project. This is a particular road scheme that I worked on, and we're able to look at a particular project, break it down. In this instance, don't know if you can see my cursor, but at the top there's other. The other was the actual operations and running of the site, so energy to power equipment, plant, and the site offices. And then these were emergency refuge areas, ERAs, or yellow laybys you see at the side of the motorway when you're driving around. I can change this data to make it more accessible to people if they find carbon to be an abstract concept. We can talk about tons of material instead of tons of carbon. We're looking to make this accessible to people, so that as a project team with the designers on a construction project and the project team, we're able to look at, okay then, so let's look at aggregate and soil being exported off site. Where is most of that? And actually, all right, we've started looking at this as carbon, because carbon's a proxy measure of sustainability. It's seen that way by a lot of people still, but actually now we're looking at waste taken off site. We can start looking at diversion from landfill, we can start looking at circular economy principles without all that environmental context feeling overwhelming. And that for me is, I think Chantel said as well, getting that over to people in a way that they feel they can deal with and understand and cope with is more important than me being clever and having all the environmental information and not being able to communicate that with people. We're also able on this particular project to look at carbon just laid out by different materials we were using. So you can see there the site offices and the plant on site are the most of the carbon on the far left. If we were to look at those laybys and what was taking up the most of the carbon with building those, it's the piling and the retaining walls, and then the asphalt and transporting material to site. So we have this conversation as a site team with the designer, with the project team. And the other thing is, it's one thing having a dashboard, but the dashboard's nice, but it's not everything. It is the communicating, and not just my judgment, but if I do this well, it's professional judgment of other people, them feeling like they can get involved and be engaged. I don't know everything. There'll be material specifications that say you can't use a recycled product there. You've got to use this specific material, and you can only get that from a virgin source. And that's going to be your supply chain, and we can challenge that with clients, but sometimes that's just the way things go. But we'll have experts in the room that aren't environmental, but they'll be able to feed into these conversations now. So on a real construction site for us, we had some targets set by the client, but of all the material by weight that was brought into and taken off site, 91% of that material in the end was either recycled somewhere else or was brought on as a recycled product. A lot of the material that we excavated on site was taken to a local facility, which was much closer than the baseline had set for that we were going to be transporting material to. So we think we saved around 1,000 tons of carbon through avoiding transportation. But by concentrating on carbon, the main point is we affected all these circular economy principles as well. So, and it didn't feel too overwhelming. People were able to engage. On a site I'm currently working on, we are building sort of a Lego block bridge. It's a prefabricated bridge. So it comes up, it turns up as blocks of concrete that have already been made in a factory somewhere else, rather than in the top right-hand corner of the screen, all of that temporary works you can see. Carbon saving in the materials, which is that graph in the middle, is only actually about 4% carbon saving in terms of the materials. But this bridge can be built 12 weeks quicker than the other one. And you saw on the slides before, a lot of the energy of running the construction site in previous project was a bulk of that was the carbon hotspot. So by building this way, we will also realise carbon savings in other areas. But beyond the carbon, because we've got less time working, there'll be less light pollution because we're working for less time. We're also able to work in a smaller area, so there'll be less light pollution in general, less nighttime working, so less noise. We're realising all these other sustainability benefits at the same time, and people can appreciate that. I keep saying you don't want to overwhelm people with this sort of information. Another benefit is that because everything's going to be produced in a factory, normally on site we overorder concrete to make sure we don't run out whilst we're doing a concrete pour, and we usually have about, the industry average is 5% waste. Building this way, it's 0.8% waste, so we're massively less wasteful as well. I put these slides together, and then I thought at the end, it's a presentation about net zero, and I haven't shown anything net zero, and I've got nothing to show that is net zero. And quite often people also say, you environmental sustainability professional working in construction industry, how environmentally sustainable is the construction industry? So I just wanted to finish up with this thought. I genuinely think that without good infrastructure, the world would be less sustainable. And the reason I say that, I won't take credit for the thinking behind it either. I read a book by someone called Hannah Ritchie, and she works on data sets. It's a really interesting book, but she kind of made the point at the end of the book that there's two halves to sustainability. There's meeting the needs of people today without compromising the needs of future generations. Now, I would say that a lot of the infrastructure projects I work on, and support, today they lead to people having sanitation, clean drinking water, access to get where they want to go around the country, and energy. My job as a chartered environmentalist now is to start building on that next bit. So one day maybe we'll have a project that's 100% recycled materials. All these elements of sustainability linked together, but that is why it's exciting to be a chartered environmentalist. It's not, it's not just that, as you say, it's a one-time thing, you get a certificate and that's great. It means that you were then able to, a company will trust your judgment to make those kind of decisions and you can get involved. So yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luke. A really interesting presentation. And I think we've been lucky with all of the presentations today. They've been really, really great. So we've now reached the Q&A section of the webinar. So a reminder, if you haven't already, please pop your questions into the Q&A. And we'll try to get as many questions as possible in the time we have left. We do also have a few questions that were submitted prior to the webinar through the registration process as well. So if I could start with the question to you all, that again was submitted in advance. So it is, what is the biggest challenge or barrier you faced in your work to deliver net zero in practice? So can I start with Luke?
I'll keep myself unmuted now. It's hard to answer in it, and I don't want to say. I think at Costain I'm lucky. I get to work in a lot of project teams where people are really bought in. The trouble is when people aren't necessarily bought in, and how much you have to do then to get their buy-in. And I think a lot of people have their own, this is what's important to them at work and why they come to work. But I think most people deep down have a why that is, the world's important, and there'll be an element of something that's important to them, or you frame it around why it's important to their work, around, actually this will save costs, this will reduce program. But finding that with certain people and spending time and relationship building, for me, I find if there's ever going to be a barrier to moving something along, for me, it's that, and then overcoming that is, that's it. That's the challenge.
Yes, yeah, and I think it sort of ties in with what came through a lot in the presentations around good communication as well, and making it kind of relate to people. Definitely. So, Anya, would you like to come in with your insights?
Yeah, I mean, I explained the challenges of being a micro business, and people could quite often dismiss single people business as being irrelevant, from a carbon point of view, from a net zero point of view. But if you add up all of us together, it is significant. So I would say you still need to think about what your overall emissions are. I mean, I explained my figures on operational emissions, touched upon the wider scope 3, but it is the wider scope 3 that will have the much greater impact. And I suppose from that point of view, the purchase goods and services, capital goods, the quantification of that from so that you really do understand what your emissions are, whether you're a micro or a larger business. The scope 3 is what's scaring people at the moment. So get started. It may not be perfect, but get started so you've got something to work for, so you know where you need to focus in order to set credible targets to reduce your emissions. Because at the moment, if you're thinking, oh my God, scope 3, far too difficult, you're missing out many opportunities.
Definitely, I think that's really good advice, because there's a good saying around don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think we're all kind of learning, aren't we, in this process. So I definitely agree with that. That don't sort of think that it's got to be perfect. It is something that we're all learning to do better. Chantel, would you like to give your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I work across a lot of different industries, but mainly in the pet and vet, hence today's talk. I was going to agree, well, I do agree with Luke around getting the buy-in and getting people to realize why they have to act on things. If it's a business, whatever area it's in, one of the barriers can be perceived cost and what's the return on the business in time of effort, budget, resource use, and trying to show them that actually, as we're seeing now with temperatures, your risk now is actually not investing in these new technologies and adaptations, because you're going to have staff that can't come into work, you're going to be running out of water, your supply chains are being disrupted. So having that confidence and knowledge to explain why we need to be reaching net zero, and it's not just because we should all do some good, which we should, but unfortunately that doesn't always make it to the top of the board's to-do list. So being able to frame it in the right way for the audience you're speaking to is one of the key ways to get over that challenge. I've found in the pet and vet industry, everybody wants to do the right thing. They're usually quite connected to nature. And the biggest challenge there, as we have in human health, is around single-use materials, because it has to be safe, it has to be sterile. So that is a real area around what we do with the waste and how we get back to reusables, which it used to be years ago before we got all single-use plastics. So yeah, different challenges in different industries, but that communication piece, I think, as we've all said, runs through all of it.
Definitely, yeah. I think you're right that it's sort of there's an element of emphasizing the risks, the opportunities, and just making sure that you adapt that to different audiences as well to be most impactful. Okay, so we've had a question live directed for Anya. So it is around, please can you expand on some of your remote auditing techniques?
Yes, yes. Remember back in the olden days when COVID happened? We don't really talk about it anymore, but it's about 5 or 6 years ago now. I got together with a lot of environmental management people within ISEP now, and we put together some guidelines on remote auditing. Otherwise, the whole of the ISO 14001 industry would have like stopped basically for a year. Um, are they relevant now? Some of them are, some of them aren't. So I always think about the audit that I'm going to be doing. How significant is it? What sort of issues we're looking at? Is it a 14001 audit? Is it ESOS? Is it carbon verification? And just to think about, firstly, that it's not going to work for every single audit. It does have its drawbacks. You don't often see the nosing around in the background, but generally for some sort of like low risk audits, what I was able to do is firstly to like communicate in advance the sorts of information that I would want to see and the sorts of things that I want to see, so that the client was able to prepare a lot more beforehand, rather than me turning up and say, show me your waste transfer notes. So it's always like getting this information beforehand, so we can conduct this over Teams. But the biggest problem is actually seeing things. So like what's over there, or having a look in bins. And it really is a case of like, we've got FaceTime on our phones. Show me where you are. Show me the office. Show me the site. So it's those sorts of like simple things, as long as you understand the caveat that it's not perfect, and thinking about the risk to the issue. So if we're looking at a chemical industry plant or something, no, probably remote audit wouldn't work for that. But for something like a data verification within an office, it's low risk. We can get around that. But it very much about having that relationship with the client, so that they can understand what you're expecting to get from them, and they've got those abilities to provide that.
Definitely. I think it sounds like the key thing is to be adaptable and flexible and use tech where you can. Um, Definitely really important points there. Okay, so I'm going to come back to one of the questions submitted prior to the webinar, and I'm going to direct it at Chantel in the first instance. But if any of you others want to kind of pitch in, then feel free to do so afterwards. Chantel, what would you say has been the biggest benefit of being a CM, and how has it helped your work to deliver net zero?
I think for me, it's been the sort of external validation almost. So we've all talked a lot here about verification, auditing, getting, making sure the data is robust. Well, chartership for me is kind of okay, I'm saying I can do this, but it's not just me saying it, it's actually this professional body that's saying it. So it's given me personally that reputational boost, because I did switch into sustainability. I've always had a lens on it throughout my career, but fully doing this around 6 or 7 years ago. So this has really helped give me my credibility, if you like, to be able to say, yes, I switched. Yes, I've got my, certificates that I've gone through and courses that I've done, but actually I've been assessed by experienced assessors from society and environment, and yes, I have achieved this reputational, this professional bar. So for my clients particularly, it's not it's just like with any of us, when you do it, when you see a net zero target, you look, has it been validated by the SBTi? Okay, well, I'm a sustainability consultancy. Are you chartered? Yes, I am. Fantastic. So it's really given me a reputational boost, and also personally, I think really helped me think, you know what, I am here, I am making an impact, and it's been recognised by a professional body, not just me thinking I'm doing the right thing. So yeah, a confidence and reputational boost definitely for me personally.
Yeah, we see, credibility and trust are two of the kind of keywords there, I think, aren't they? And they're with some of the main benefits, I think, of being chartered, definitely. Luke and Anya, did you want to come in with anything to add, or are you kind of content with what Chantel said? Is that sort of like aligns with your experience as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
happy with that. But just one other point, because I've been doing this for a long time. You have to keep up with it. So it's not just a case of like tick, you're chartered. You've got to keep up your certain amount of training, certain amount of experience and skills. So yeah, I was chartered 20 years ago. I'm still chartered now. So brilliant.
I think to build on that, I do think for me it becomes a bit of identity as well, and that is motivating in itself, right? Because that's a bit of who I am. So now I am motivated to keep that up, as Anya's saying.
Yeah, definitely. It's that CPD, as you say, continued professional development and kind of keep making sure that you're still on that at that standard. I think it's really important. Okay, so we've had one more question come in live. So I'll direct this to Luke in the first instance, but again, feel free to pitch in, Anya and Chantel afterwards. But it is, do the speakers, do you, Luke, see your clients having more of a focus on carbon within recent years? And do you see this being incorporated into contract deliverables, or is it still being seen as more of a nice to have? Is there any advice on how to approach clients when it isn't their focus?
I think I can't think of we ain't got any clients that this isn't a focus that I work with anyway. This is more and more of a client focus. I mainly work with sort of highways contractors personally, but I help out with utilities contractors and others within Costain. I've been asked to go to a meeting on Friday to discuss how do we do better at carbon on motorway schemes. You know, it's not going away. If anything, there's more and more scrutiny on it. There's fewer. I think there's a realization that there's maybe not that many chartered environmentalists that can help. So actually, the ones that can get asked more. This isn't going away. There's more and more and more of it. In the last couple of years, even feels like there's more concentration on this than there was 5 years ago, and there was a hell of a lot of concentration on it 5 years ago. I don't know what else to add to that. Yes, it's more and more of a focus. Every time we bid for work, nearly every time there's a question. How do you reduce your carbon? I think there was a session earlier today for the Net Zero Week, and somebody else was talking about that. But yeah, if we don't answer that well, or if it's not its own question, it's built into another question for a tender. So yeah, it's not going away.
Yeah, and I think everyone can see the effects as well. I mean, we've been talking about the heat, having all these heat waves and everything. And I think we just see that more and more. So it brings it,
I think the
makes
clients
it more
as well,
real to people.
they
Yeah,
want
definitely.
answers. They're looking to someone else for that reason to give them a solution, and that's hard because you give me a solution. It's not that easy. So it's they want you to turn up with silver bullets that don't necessarily exist. So it's hard work.
Definitely. Anya and Chantel, did you have anything to add? I'm conscious of time, but if you wanted to add anything briefly, then feel free. No. Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. I'm just going to reshare my screen very briefly to close on a few slides. So bear with me. Okay, firstly, a reminder that this webinar is just one of many taking place today and tomorrow for the Net Zero Week online conference. You can view the full conference agenda via the Net Zero Week website, and I think the link should be in the chat. And join the conversation on social media as well via the hashtag Net Zero Week. If today's CM speakers have inspired you towards gaining your CM registration, we are holding a couple of free webinars in the coming months. So first up, we have how to become a CM, which will cover where you apply, what the application process looks like, and more. And then in September, we'll be joined by more amazing chartered environmentalists to explore the value of CM, including their experience of the application process and their top tips for aspiring CMs. And I believe the links to register for these webinars are in the chat, so please do join us then. So that brings me to the end of today's webinar. A big thank you again to our guest speakers, Luke, Chantel and Anya, and to everyone for attending and asking your questions. We hope to see you at one of our future webinars, but for now, goodbye.